Welcome to Let's Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Georgette. I'm the mom.
And I'm TJ. I'm the son.
And we both work and study in the field of psychology, and we are passionate about sharing what we know with you so that you can live your best life. So today we're going to talk about perspective, and we're starting with social perspective. So social perspective is the ability to understand how a situation appears to another person and how that person reacts cognitively and emotionally to it, right?
Of course.
The opposite of perspective taking is egocentrism, right? So why does this help? This helps because it helps us uncover more information. It gives us a broader view.
Right. And also kind of looks at what we need to do kind of consciously and identify that not all of us today aren't necessarily looking for more information. Okay. A lot of things we're already going in assuming we know or have a very, very good understanding of the entirety of the situation. So by constantly going in, looking for more information, right, that's going to continue to help you in the long run. It's also going to help you if you identify that it's not something that you're automatically doing. Okay. Right. When you go to sit down before listening to this podcast, did you look at the chair and study before sitting down? No, you pretty much had a core belief about chairs and sat down and had nothing but faith that you were going to sit down there. Now, obviously, that's not something that you need to be questioning. I'm sure that we don't have phobias towards chairs, but towards other things, you need to introduce new information and recognize that we're not doing it on our own.
Right. What you're speaking of is schemas, right? We have schemas for people, places,
archetypes,
things.
ourselves, core beliefs, right? They're all ultimately the same thing. We go in thinking we know what's going to happen.
Oh, that's so dangerous. So
Yeah.
dangerous. So it helps us to better phrase what we are trying to say so it's more easily understood. So if I understand somebody's perspective, I might phrase things to help them understand a little bit more about what I'm trying to communicate.
Yeah. And another thing that your brain automatically does, well, I don't have to look at it from their perspective, me. But what's really going to be beneficial for you is to know that perspective, because that's going to be the ultimate real response that you want, as opposed to just the one that's just coming from your perspective. So it's not just looking at it from their sake, it's looking at it for your sake.
Right.
Absolutely. Kind of like we talked about in the previous hand,
That's
information.
a really good point. A lot of us approach communication as us pushing information to other people, but really we want them to do something with that information, process it, acknowledge it. And if they're going to do the right thing, we need to phrase it in a right way, right? It also works reverse. I need to appreciate someone's perspective when I'm hearing information too. It's going to help me retain that information better, help me to apply it if I understand where they're coming from, because that's going to give me context that I wouldn't have otherwise.
And it's going to leave you susceptible to one of the most common biases that we all have, or distortions, I should say, which is, I did this on the personalization.
Yes.
Yeah, personification is the literature.
Yes.
Personalization. When things happen, we tend to take things so personally, right? When I explain this in group therapy sessions, right, as a group instructor, right, there are some things that I can see that are going to make me feel frustrated. If someone goes on their phone, I'm going to start to take it personally, right? If someone starts talking to somebody else, I'm going to take it personally. If somebody starts sleeping, I'm going to take it personally, right? That is commonly going to happen until I introduce their perspective or something else that my brain doesn't automatically take into consideration, right? When people are tired in groups with me, they're most likely balancing their medications again, or maybe being off medication for quite some time. So them just being off is a blessing. So being in, I can't take it personally. If someone's on their phone, a lot of times they're dealing with something personal. They got to deal with something important. I can't be so selfish and take it personally. Imagine that their experience with me only has to do with me, right? Like to make ourselves the main star in everybody else's story. Oh, they're not having a good time because of me. Right. It might not have anything to do with my group, and it's almost selfish for me to look at it like such. So it's ultimately, long story short, as I always do, problem solving. A lot more things that you can solve there, as opposed to some of the other ways that we automatically look at similar situations.
Absolutely. When I am teaching and I see...
Let's talk about it, right?
Yeah. When I'm teaching and I see student not engaged, like you said, there could be lots of reasons for it. Many that don't have anything to do with me. But I
ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't have breakfast. I usually take
maybe
that
they
as
smoked a doobie.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I take that as a challenge. You know, I'm gonna connect with them at some point today. I don't know when it'll be, but that's my challenge.
And that is a perspective shift that you might not have chosen to begin with, especially initially. Oh man, I'm me. I'm gonna take it as a challenge. I'm gonna be so good at my behavior and so intentional in my thoughts that they're going to like me, as opposed to being just immediately defeated. It's totally entirely up to you, the perspective you choose in that situation.
Absolutely.
And that is the case in everybody else's. And these are perspectives. We're talking about small things, big things.
Right. Social perspective also helps us to feel more positive about the interactions as a whole.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with somebody's point, but you can feel good that your point was shared and that you understand theirs.
The understanding, important part, understanding how they can get there, right? I hear this all the time. I just don't get it. I don't understand how someone can get there, right? Well, we need to start identifying that when it comes to the brain, it really does make sense how someone could possibly get to where they get to. Not necessarily condoning it, but once again, when you take away that first initial kind of barrier, it helps both parties involved. Just make sure I didn't hit that button. Right? So once again, identifying, all the just questioning. If anything, all that we're learning is the more that you question, the less emotion is involved. The more that you're just going to be balanced. Because I like emotions, I want them in play, but I don't want them controlling you because most of us are being controlled by our emotions.
Right. So social perspective results in improved relationships. It basically demonstrates that someone really does understand the thoughts, feelings, and needs of somebody else they're communicating with. Some important aspects of perspective taking is one is realizing that everyone has that unique perspective, right?
So unique. So some things can be so like finite and put into people that they may not even necessarily know, or there's so many things that our nervous system is constantly taking in and putting into perspective, being kind of put into play, that everybody's so different. Right. And once again, just identifying it's going to be the case. It's going to be a lot. Right. And it may not even necessarily be the person that you're disagreeing with. It may be their childhood that you're disagreeing with. Ooh, now we're getting deep. May just be ultimately the childhood that your childhood they're disagreeing. Ooh, that was interesting. That was a good point.
Yes, it was. A person's perspective helps them select and organize the information they attend to and their experiences, which I think is really interesting.
Schemas that you just talked about, right? Yeah. Doing that to identify for future times what is biologically advantageous, and for the brain it can be tricked into thinking just what is constantly being shared, what needs to be shared instead. And
perspective can shift. It
needs to shift.
Yeah, you say something to me on Monday, you say something to me on Friday, I might take it different ways, right?
Yeah, and even perspective just from priorities, I think we're getting into a little bit later, like just think about my priorities and my goals and my intentions and my purposes in like high school. Laughable. Hilarious, right?
Also understanding that each person, you say one thing and they can take two different meanings from it. You can be in a conversation with four people and all four of those people leave with a different perspective of what happened or what was said.
Yeah, and the example I always give is the joking, right? Like you give a joke, you roast somebody in a certain group of four people, hilarious. Funniest thing ever, not a big deal at all. Some people, it's like, oh my gosh, how dare you, right? And now look at the situation. One makes you feel like funny, good friend. One makes you feel like a complete jackwagon, right? Is it necessarily the fault in yourself, or quite possibly how the people were taking? I imagine we just learned for the future. That person might just be a little more sensitive, right? Identifying, is this a one-time thing or is this continuous? Now I'm adapting if I want to keep this relationship, or identifying if this is something I want to remove because I don't want to necessarily adapt all that much, but it's still my choice, still perspective, still taking it in.
Right.
Boom.
So misunderstandings often result because we assume that everyone is seeing things from the same perspective. So that's just something to be aware of. So what causes those mismatches in perception? Well, sometimes it's a mismatch in knowledge. Sometimes somebody knows something that somebody else doesn't.
First off, this is the case always, but just with ourselves, mismatch in knowledge, right? Like as we kind of alluded to, like a lot of our core beliefs and schemas and thoughts that we use so regularly today, a lot of them started to be created back when we were children and kids, and back when we had a huge lack of knowledge, right? So introducing that there's new knowledge that needs to be attained towards a lot of different things in your life, because not necessarily does this happen situationally with people, but just in ourselves, we have a mismatch in knowledge. Just imagine from me to another individual. Once again, more things to hopefully get you consciously prepared.
Mismatch in priorities. So sometimes there's about a differences in the goals that each person has.
Yeah, I mean, like here we go. Mismatch in priorities. The person who's stealing in order to feed their family, the cop that has to stop them, right? Both need food on the table. Both need to survive. Both technically not enemies, just a difference in what they need to do to survive.
Wow. Very cool. Wow. I feel like we need a pause here for those. Take that in.
Difference in as net is it, and they could love everything else similar about each other, but that's the one thing that could stop it.
Right.
Because danger just is a little bit louder than safety until we consciously shine more of a light on it. Perspective.
Right. That kind of segues right into the next mismatch, which is in situational awareness. Two people sizing up the situation very differently, right?
Yeah. Hey, you skydive for the first time. Mismatch in situational awareness. I have no idea what to do. I'm going to cry. I'm going to piss my pants. Someone who does it a million times doesn't need to do it. Somebody could probably read a book on the way down. Yeah. Is the situation in question good or bad? No, it's entirely to do with that person's situational awareness. And who has the better situation awareness? Most likely the person that does it more from a conscious standpoint, creating safety towards it. Same thing with you, even in situations that you don't necessarily want to deal with.
And then sometimes there's a mismatch in mindsets. We have different belief systems, right?
Point blank. So, some of us just have a different goal, different idea of what constitutes existence. That happens. Nobody's wrong, and no one's really wrong.
Right.
Everything makes sense in each individual's person's brain.
At
another
that
thing to identify,
moment, yes.
To accept.
Mm-hmm. So what can we do about this? We can approach every conversation with curiosity, as TJ talked about earlier.
Yeah. Why? Because at the very end, why is a much better reaction than, oh, poor me, or anything else. Why? It stops the emotion, gets more conscious thoughts out, it helps direct it to a much more positive mindset or good foundation, at least to start off the construction of continuing thought processes or patterns.
Use open questions in conversations.
Just ask questions. That's easy. I do that all the time. I love talking to people because I don't even talk to people. I just make them talk to me by asking them questions.
That's awesome.
There's millions of questions. It's easy. Millions of questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite color shoelaces?
Right.
And then they'll be like, what? And then they'll think about it, and then they'll have one, and then you ask why, and then you start messing with their minds. It's great. That's not one of my secrets. Don't do it. That's not. I just made that up.
Reflect on your own situation and see what weaknesses you can identify. That's something else you can do.
We look at it and say, why me? Why me? We don't look and say, hey, how can I avoid this? Mm-hmm. What was within my control? What was outside of my control? Whatever was inside of my control, what can I do to learn from this? Because the only thing that I can do is find out how to take this and turn it into some type of blessing, or as close to a blessing as possible, because the only choice that I have is to either leave it in vain or make it a good thing. And if you leave it in vain, you're leaving that person or that whatever is in question with the power and the control.
Visualize yourself in the other person's place.
Yeah.
Think about what someone might be feeling. Those are two other strategies. These last two I'm a real big fan of. One is to paraphrase what you're hearing, and not to demonstrate that you get them, but just to demonstrate your effort in trying to understand them.
And it also helps fill in your time with a possible response. I do this a lot consciously because it helps. Someone gives me 4 sentences. If I just say it back to them verbatim, they think I'm filling the time. They get the thoughts from a different perspective. And now I have a lot more time to think about how can I possibly respond to this. So someone's like, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. So I'm like, okay, so you're this because of that, because of this, and because of that. And then sometimes you can simplify it and they're like, perspective, they're like, oh. Or if nothing else, I'm just okay. Now I'm just for this is a terrible. I'm reloading. I'm got the artillery to keep it at bay. So yeah,
what's really interesting about that tactic is not only does it help you, but it helps them hear what you heard, increasing their social perspective at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then the last strategy is acknowledging, not agreeing necessarily, but acknowledging their perspective, because that also demonstrates an interest and an effort to understand, right?
Mm-hmm. And all these can be, these weirdly in our mind get mixed up and emotionally get thought into like, this is like submissive or this or that. But you really want people to think like similar to you, or do you really want to get those points across that you're so passionate about with the least amount of walls as possible? This is how you do it. A lot of you that are trying to get information across really thoroughly are missing a really key conceptual thing, which is other people's perspective, the conversation, and and even to take it one step further to the first step, but just all these things more intentional.
That's an important point, I think. Why do we say things to begin with? It's not just to be heard. It's for people to do something with that information. If you want them to do the right thing with the information, you have to take in their perspective into consideration.
You have to be able to accept and take in and understand their perspective. That is how you're going to be able to get people to see that what you want to see, or maybe to lead them to a better light. And now you can see why not everyone in the world can be a therapist.
Right. So sometimes we lose perspective. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Continue.
Sometimes we lose perspective of our own situation, and usually that leads to overreactions. And you know it when you've done it. We've all done it. But you need to, when that happens, ask yourself, what are the costs to you and other people around?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And in the times of that's like when we overreact. The reason why we're overreacting is because we have a completely distorted perspective of the situation. That overreaction has most likely been practiced to the point that it is now start off as a much smaller emotion. You have these unhelpful thoughts and you kept being practiced, and now the thoughts stayed the same, kind of was the core, and then the emotions started being greater. So that overreaction is just a really, really practiced, a good way to look at it, just really, really practiced perspective, right? And it's the recognition that you have to identify something different. As you do, your body's gonna kind of overreact as you introduce these new things, and as you introduce the new thoughts, your brain will change to the new normal that you're creating. So so to those people, it's like, it's not just as thinking positive or changing perspective or doing this. It is recognizing that your body and brain is going to give you a little resistance, but eventually it's going to help you. Maybe now that you have that perspective, it may help you, may give you that one conscious thought that's like, oh man, this isn't even necessarily me. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not this, you're not that. Sometimes we just have different perspectives.
Right.
Happens.
And sometimes it helps to stand back, observe, and describe it without judging. Because if you do that, what you're allowing yourself to do is take the emotion out of it. Think about it more reasonably, right?
Yeah, because in those moments when you think of it emotionally, you are accessing lower level thinking. Your brain is more so having thoughts going off of the instinct of fight, flight, or freeze. And those are going to be thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that are most likely not going to serve you well in most situations. So you got to put a stop to them.
Right. Sometimes even when we take the emotion out of it, we still feel like our reaction is warranted. But you have to think about what would be changed if you allow yourself to continue with that gut reaction, or if you, just let it ride out. I remember one time we were at the store and somebody irritated me, and I was in the right, and I could have made some passive aggressive comment to let them know, but I remember you saying something like, to what end? Like,
I think this is one of the best things that I personally do. I think skill wise, I think perspective. Yeah. Someone cuts you off at the grocery store line. People will hold on to that all day. And
they will.
And perspective, it doesn't matter. What is that action worth? $0. How much am I spending on it? Some of us a lot more. You get cut off on the road. I'm safe. I'm happy. That person maybe might just be an asshole on the road. And if they're an asshole on the road, they're most likely an asshole in other areas of their life, because that's the easiest way to project their insecurities is on the road. So whoopsie daisies. Maybe that's more reflection of that person than it is on me.
Right.
Perspective. There is always a way that you can make it annoyingly positive, or at the very least annoyingly rational. For those of you that we do this in therapy with, it starts off with the people that every single day they re-experience a trauma. The first step is introducing those diaphragmatic breaths so the body calms down and just says, hey, I'm safe.
Yeah.
I'm safe, right? And that's kind of the core, and all these other manifestations is just safety, danger, control, lack of control. Like we talked about, kind of the simplistic nature. And so simplistic in theory, hard in application and practicality, right? So I don't know. I think, am I done? Was that a completed thought?
That was.
Good, because my mind went blank, so I was good that it finished. I don't even remember what I said, to be honest. I just had a freaking flash. That was like, that's so Raven. I had a vision and I don't even remember what I said. Oh, she remembers what she sees. Continue. I'm atrocious.
Sometimes though, we do need to just ride those out, realize the impact that our reactions will have, and just let it go. And remember too, that everything that has happened to your life up to date has made you who you are today.
The greatest remedy for anger is delay. I think you mentioned a couple sentences ago exactly that. Mistakes you make in anger will cost the rational person the rest of their life.
I didn't say that earlier, but I'll take credit for it.
Which one?
Both.
Cool. Saying that. Well, the last one I just said was a paraphrase of some other quote said by someone much smarter than me, which is like most
We
of
do
what
that a lot.
This is most of what I do. Most of what I say is not an original thought. Which, that's isn't that the way it should be?
Most of what I
Isn't
say
that should
is
be?
not original, but you add the color and the examples, which is always original and entertaining.
But
and
it first started off
informative.
not being original because it was introduced, so I had some type of influence.
Right.
Okay, now we're getting off. What are we doing?
We are going to just remind you
Oh,
that
peace.
when you have a situation that causes you to overact, just chalk it up to an inconvenience. Find that peace and move on.
Oh, here's a good one. I like this one. Ask yourself what the cost to you and other people around you. That's an exercise that we do. Think about the cost and the benefits, because when you start to think about the cost, you start to kind of separate yourself from the situation. So if I am, like I said, I'm getting cut off the road and it's ruining my day. What are you costing? I'm costing the interpersonal relationships with the people in my life. Seriously. I am not going to be as friendly with the people just based on that person cutting me off. I'm not going to be as efficient at work. I'm not going to make as much money in my bonuses. I'm not going to be able to have as much money to spoil my kids the way that I want to. I'm reframing and putting the perspective to a much bigger thing, because it deserves that. You deserve to have each one of the things in your life to have a conscious perspective that you have chosen. And we don't always, at this point, many of us have not chosen it yet. And we just think that it is the way that it is because it's continuing to go through our brain. Change it.
The cost is that you're giving that one incident power over your whole day. Why?
The cost is you are now more inclined to focus on survival than on peace.
Yeah.
Just based off being cut off, based off having an unhealthy meal, based off not getting all the sleep, based off not exercising, based on not having good interpersonal relationships. Kind of shows how easy it is to possibly be anxious and depressed when you have an
excuse for it all the time.
Ooh,
yes,
you got an excuse for excuses all the time. Like
wow.
it.
Yeah. So
where else are we getting at?
We're done.
I keep getting off tangents.
No, they're good. We want you to think about other people's perspective this week a little bit more. Just make a little bit of effort to think about other people's perspectives.
Look at yours and question yours. Question your motives. Why am I thinking this way? What is this really telling about the entirety of the situation? Is there another way that can be more biologically advantageous? Because I guarantee you there's a way that can connect to a purpose, to a goal, towards gratitude that you have not necessarily introduced before. And here's another thing. We want to talk about perspective. I get this a lot when some people are resistant to things like gratitude, like, well, think about what that act is. Who consciously sits there is like, I really don't want to think about the things that I'm grateful for right now. You're not constantly doing that. That's got to be some unhelpful, distorted thought coming from an emotion. So as you consciously think about the things that you're grateful for, right, it helps you introduce that as more of a common pathway and helps maybe make it more of a pleasurable experience for you instead of just giving up as you try to do. It's like, oh, my brain's giving me unhelpful thoughts. As you kind of have that perspective, your brain is going to give you some resistance because it wants to stay exactly the same. You have to make it, hear it anew, and change to your liking.
Right.
Because the more you do that now, 92% of your thoughts from today are repeats from yesterday, most likely. So as you introduce them today, you can change the trajectory for the rest of your life. If you every day, what's your perspective? What's your purpose? What are you doing this for? Boom.
All right. No, that's it. Have a great week. We will talk to you. Let's next talk about it Tuesday.
Well, we'll yell. I don't know what the hell that was.